In middle school and high school, my brother and I journeyed out to weird and supposedly haunted spots in our state. My brother, Tony, was a writer for his high school's newspaper, and his column dealt with all the trips that we explored. Most of these places were just odd and had very colorful locals, but one place still bothers us. In 2005, Tony's friend Scott, and I decided that we would investigate a location that was strange and had a lot of tragic history. Some background on the location. It's a relatively small town off one of the highways that has extremely narrow roads and a ton of overhanging trees. During the time that we visited, it was the dead of winter and we had just had a snowstorm, so it was gray outside and all of the trees were dead. There was a specific road that stretched through the town that we were interested in, as there have been sightings of ghosts, weird phenomena, and tragedy. The road starts out a couple of miles into a foresty type of area, then goes over a dam and ends with a couple of residential houses after a few nature hiking trails. It is a relatively narrow road and was pretty dangerous maneuvering it since the snow and ice obstructed our view. When we got to the dam, there was a chain-linked fence on the sides, and it was extremely narrow. This is what it looks like. This is the actual dam and what it looks like to drive through. According to local legend, before the chain-linked fence was put up, there were a ton of suicides surrounding this dam. It is also known for its mob activity in which members of the mob would dump bodies over the side of the dam. When the town built the chain-linked fence on the sides, the mob found another way to dispose of the bodies by physically walking down the hills on the sides of the dam and disposing the bodies in the river. Next to the river, there were two brick defunct furnaces that looked like medieval towers. I can't recall why or when these furnaces were used, but they seemed out of place. There was an arched hole in front of the furnace where you can dunk under and look into where the smoke would come out. Although I'm sure these furnaces were built for more practical uses, there have been reports of the mob burning bodies in the furnace. Anywho, on with the story. As we turned onto this road, the beginning of one of the most bizarre experiences began. A car that was turning out of the road slowed down, and the driver gave us a hand signal that we were not sure what to make of it. The man placed his hand up to his forehead, with his palm facing us, and his ring finger and middle finger were down while his pointer finger and pinky finger were up. It was basically the "let's rock" hand signal. He had a really serious face and looked like we should have reciprocated the signal back to him, but we were too puzzled to even think of what to do. Once he passed us, we started joking that he was just a committed fan of rock and roll. About 15 minutes down the road, another car passes us, and the driver does the same hand signal. We figured that maybe it's a cult that these people belong to, and that they are testing to see who is an outsider. We got worried that the last two drivers would alert someone to follow us, so we started to do the sign to the passing drivers, and they would nod in accordance with the signals. It was unnerving, but also extremely fascinating. At a point, the density of the trees began to disperse and we came upon the dam. It was eerie looking out at the lake, and the only sound we heard was the pouring water through the dam. We parked in a gravel lot after we reached the other side of the dam so we could go explore the area. There were several trails for hiking and camping off of this parking lot, and we took the trail that would lead us down to the river where the furnaces were located. It was a treacherous walk getting to the river, as the dirt and the snow on the trail made it difficult for us to stand and walk upright. We finally reached the furnaces and the river after 10 minutes of attempting not to roll down the hill and land on one of the concrete blocks by the dam. We looked up at the dam and the surrounding area and noticed that there were no sounds, no birds or insects, no wind, nothing. We kept looking at each other like we sensed something might happen. It was a good 5 minutes until I decided to be the first one to move and wander around. I was curious about the furnaces and stepped into the first one to see what it looked like. It was so quiet in there to the point that I couldn't hear Tony or Scott outside. I looked up through the hole at the top and all I saw were gray skies. I walked out of the furnace to let Tony and Scott take pictures outside and inside the furnace. Tony went in first, took a few pictures, and then Scott went in and took a couple more with his camera. We began seeing cars on our side of the dam, stopping and stalling for quite some time. It first seemed like they were curious of what we were doing, but as more cars began to stop, we became nervous and decided to book it out of there. Down the road, there was a house that had awesome rock sculptures in the front yard. It was really neat to see a Loch Ness Monster sculpture and a UFO rock sculpture. It simply added to the weirdness of this road and town. As we exited the road, there were several more cars with drivers giving us the weird signal, and we still pondered what that all meant. A few hours after we get home, my brother frantically calls me to his room. He is beside himself and shows me pictures that Scott took of the furnace. The first picture just showed the hole and an empty gray sky, pretty much what we all saw when we looked up into the hole. The second picture, there was a shadow of a being or figure looking down through the hole. The shoulders and head were clearly identifiable, but there was no face and it was pitch black. The picture was taken only a few seconds after the first one. I was shocked but skeptical, as I thought that maybe the photo was tampered with. Tony called up Scott, furiously asking him if he had photoshopped it or faked it in any way, but Scott was fervent that he didn't do anything to it, and he was just as freaked out as we were. He swore that when he was taking the picture that he didn't see the figure through his lens. Scott was nearly having a panic attack on the phone, and Tony just kept pacing around the room in disbelief. They are not very good actors, so I was quite weirded out by the whole situation. I didn't freak out, but it worried me for a while as I kept having this feeling of someone or something watching me weeks after our trip. Tony and Scott felt the same notion as well. Now, when we were at the furnace, there was no one around. The furnace doesn't have internal or external stairs, ladders, or ropes. At the time, the trees surrounding the furnace were a good 10 feet away, or fallen due to the heavy snowfall and freezing conditions. To us, there was no way someone would be on the top of the furnace, and if someone was up there, we would have seen or heard them. For all we know, the world's finest assassin was probably sent by the locals to spy and destroy us for not being firm believers of the gods of rock. I have had strange and nerve-wracking experiences, but this is still one of the weirdest places I have ever visited. After talking with my brother, he said that neither he or Scott have the photo anymore. He did say that the school may have a hard copy of the article, but the school typically throws out most of the articles after 5 years. I can inquire with the school, but it might be a long shot. Sorry, guys. So, before I explain the story, I just want to set a few things straight. I had this friend who was a twin. They had a younger sister too, but that is irrelevant. Shortly after the twins were born, the mom had a stillbirth, and it caused her a massive amount of stress. My friend would tell me that he remembers when he was younger he would wake up to his mom in the other room talking to the empty crib. She would have conversations at strange hours of the night, but apparently this kind of behavior is pretty normal given the circumstances. It messed her up pretty bad, and later on she started telling everyone she was a medium. She claimed she had a sixth sense and was sensitive to the afterlife phenomena. The older the twins got, she started to calm down a bit with the strange behavior, but she still believed she had a gift. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I can tell you the creepy experience that happened to me when I was at their house during a boys' night. It was the twins' birthday, and the one I was friends with managed to convince his mom to invite a small handful of friends over. His mom made plans to go out that night with her new partner, which was great because we were always up to no good, and without supervision, this was the perfect opportunity to get some mischievous done. His mom finally left us all alone. After an hour or so, we were running out of things to do. I don't know why, but I suggested we try a Ouija board. I've seen them in movies and thought it would be hilarious if we tried it out ourselves. All the boys agreed, and I got to work setting up the table outside. I cut out letters along with a yes and no. I placed them in the circle on a plastic table and put one of his mom's shot glasses in the middle. I explained the rules to the guys and we were all extremely excited to give it a go. The other twin was tired though. He said he was going to take a shower and called an early night. He also didn't like the idea of us doing this sort of thing, but we continued to do it anyways despite his concern. We decided we would set up a tripod camera to overlook the table just in case anything supernatural were to happen. At this point, we were all sitting around the table. We placed our fingers on the shot glass and started firing questions into the circle. We were asking stupid immature questions like, "Are you gay?" or "Can we speak to Elvis?" Nothing seemed to happen, but we were all laughing and carrying on. Then the glass started to move, but we could tell straight away it was someone on the table. You could tell by the way the glass was moving. It was obvious and annoying because I really wanted it to work. We started to get restless and we were on the verge of giving up on the whole thing because people were being stupid and no one was giving it a fair chance. The next bit is where things get weird. The air became cold and the breeze died down. I remember that chilling feeling, shivering outside in the cold. My eyes started to water and I felt hypersensitive. I'm pretty sure the other guys felt it too. That's when it happened. The glass started to move randomly. It felt completely different this time. It wasn't being pushed, if that makes sense. It was kind of dragging our fingers along the table. The movement was slow and eerie. At this point, we all look up at each other, darting from face to face trying to figure out who was messing around this time. Every single face around the circle looked terrified and confused. The glass moved from letter to letter, not spelling words but only gibberish. I hated that feeling, but I needed to know more. I started to ask serious questions this time. "Who are you?" Still nothing. The glass was just moving around with no purpose. Then it would stop as if it disconnected. Then it would start up again. It would get weak, then fade back in with movement. "Are you a person?" I asked. The glass moved to the center, then back down to no. This is the moment where I knew this was a bad idea. The glass started to pick up speed. It was moving around in circles, completely ignoring the letters. Its movements became fast and aggressive. It felt as if it was being pushed into the table really hard. Everyone was horrified. A few guys even took their fingers off the shot glass in shock. The remainder of us decided to push on out of curiosity. "Are you dead?" another person asked. The glass slowly slid over to yes. Then all of a sudden the lights and all the power to the house turned off. We were all sitting in pitch black darkness outside with sudden silence. We shot up and broke away from the table. There was a sense of panic in the air and we all started to completely freak out. Then the power surged back on and the TV started up again. The other twin ran outside, still wet from the shower, only wearing a towel. He came out asking who turned the bathroom lights off while he was in there. We explained the situation outside with the Ouija board and he refused to believe it. Then I thought, yes, we recorded it with the camera. We ran over to the tripod and grabbed the camera to show him the evidence. The camera was turned off, and we were all dumbfounded because it had full battery when we started, and we were positive we pressed record. We quickly turned it back on. Yes, the battery bar was just about full like I thought. We pressed play, but being the amateur that I am, I had it recorded on an awkward angle. You couldn't see the table, but just the back of our heads. As it played out, we got to the part just before the power to the house turned off, and then so did the camera footage. The video just stopped. Somehow the camera turned off at the exact time the house power went out. The weird thing was the camera was on a battery and had nothing to do with the house power. The mood of the night was ruined. No one was happy or excited. We were all just quiet. Everyone was trying to process what had just happened. Even the twin who was in the shower was confused and creeped out. We asked him if he was the one who messed around with the power inside and he swore he hadn't. I believe him to this day. I never messed around with a Ouija board after that chilling experience. What started off as a joke became weird really fast. I just want to know if anyone else had a similar story. This happened years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. My eyes are watering as I am writing this right now. Now that I am older, I'm thinking about trying it one last time this weekend with a good friend. hoping for a similar reaction now that I am more mature. I'm sure I could hold it together this time and understand it a bit better. I don't know what to think, but yeah, that's my story. I'm slow as hell and haven't gotten around to telling this story in months. It's nothing special with some huge climax, but it creeped me out enough to be included on this subreddit, or so I think. Sorry for the length, I get descriptive. Pics aren't paranormal, just reference pics. I'm an au pair in Sweden and spend most summer weekends in my family's summer house, which is out in the archipelago outside of Stockholm. Breathtakingly beautiful place, but boonies doesn't even begin to cover it. The nearest neighbor is about a 30-minute brisk walk away, and after that there is nothing except ocean and thick, terrifying forest. This particular night was date night for the parents, so I was left with the 2 children alone out in the terrifying murder house. There are 2 houses on the property, one main house and the other is a guest house, where of course I got to sleep all alone. It's literally 2 meters from the ocean. The game plan was to go exploring in the forest, which I had never done alone with the children, only with the parents, and then walk to pick up my boyfriend from the bus stop. He would stay with us until the parents got home from their date, and then my boyfriend and I would go sleep in the guest house. So, while in the forest, I kept getting the jitters. Things were definitely stranger, and it wasn't just because I was alone with the 2 children. I grew up in the forest, but several times we heard the birds calling out these weird distress call noises, and big flocks would appear, a long time before we were even close enough to scare them, and there were big thudding footsteps nearby. I was terrified of there being an asshole moose or something. We came to a little hidden lake, and then things got even weirder. Though the place is unpopulated for miles, there was a woman sitting on a rock opposite to us, about 60 feet away. She was naked and wet as though she had been swimming even though the water was much too cold for that. When she saw us, she stood up and did this weird pacing thing, like she would get close to the water and then back away, then move close again, like she wanted to cross and come toward us, but there was the obvious lake barrier in the way. The kids were mildly worried, and it wasn't long before I ushered them back the way we came, and we made our way out of the forest. On the road to pick up my boyfriend, I had the oddest sensation of being watched. I was really terrified, actually, but we met up with him with no incident and returned to the cabin just as the sun was setting. We gave the kids dinner, and just as they were curling up with a Swedish comic book, the main door slammed open. I really remember thinking it was a real person. There was a heavy footfall and then bam, like someone had stomped and flung open the door, but there was no one there. My boyfriend went out and had a look around. Nothing. Must have been the wind, of course, right? It's always the wind. While we were in bed, we could hear skittering around and clawing from underneath where we were. I knew for a fact that rats and other rodents camped out at the other end of the house because that's where the kitchen was. I had a really awful feeling in the pit of my stomach, but my rational boyfriend promised me it was a fox or a weasel and not to get worked up. Fast forward to 3 a.m., I had to pee. My boyfriend and I were in the guest house. My bosses had come home long ago. I'm a badass and pee outside, no problem. So I stumbled out of the darkness and squatted down outside the guest house to pee. It was right when I straightened and adjusted my shirt, that I got that awful feeling of dread. I had it in the forest. I had it on the way to see my boyfriend. I had it while we were camped out inside the house. I had felt just fine in the guest house with my boyfriend, but now the feeling was back. Behind the guest house is a steep hill, about a 45-degree angle, and on that hill sits what we call the ghost house. It was the house of an old soldier in the 1600s, and now it just sits there all terrifying and vacant. There is a trail going from the ghost house to the main summer home, and my boss had lit the trail with dim solar lamps. The idea was to light your way up the hill and not trip and die over a tree root. I could sense something moving up the trail, That means something moving from the main house to the ghost house. I squatted in the dark and saw a shape of a person, but that wasn't right because the solar light you could see jeans or shirts or jackets, and ours all had reflectors on them, but this was just a black shadow. I thought it was an animal, but then ruled that out because it had 2 legs, walking really fast and smoothly, but then it slowed and seemed to notice me. I was actually terrified, but my intuition told me to commence the stare down, so I did. I was fighting to see in the dark, and just when I couldn't focus, I realized there were 2 very softly illuminated eyes on its face, and they were on me. It slowed down to a stroll, and I could see the eyes change from a bluish to a yellowish glow based on where they were in relation to the solar lamps. So I stared. It was going so slow it felt surreal, and I could hear twigs snapping and other noises that a real-life, non-imagined creature makes. I remember actually thinking, this isn't a hallucination, it's fucking walking on the ground. And then the weirdest part, instead of moving at a normal, relative height the way human eyes would do, the eyes started kind of hovering. They were 6 feet off the ground, suddenly would dip down to 4 feet, then back up to 5, and they never left me. But the direction this thing was moving in never changed. It kept going up the hill. The eyes and the figure faded out into the darkness once the solar lamps ended, and I went back into the guest house and locked the door. I heard nothing else that night. My boyfriend slept through everything, but early in the morning he woke up whimpering from a nightmare, and that's the only time anything has ever happened at that summer house, and I was there for collectively a month. I've been reading through stories on this sub for a while, and I thought I'd share my own. I grew up in a weird, old Victorian house in Kentucky that several people think is haunted by a ghost. I think it has a demon in it. I don't live there anymore, and I would never go back even if you paid me. My mother and father married in 1989 and moved into the house in 1990. Something about it made my mother fall in love. It was spacious, she loved the Victorian style, but there was just something about it that felt right to her. When they were moving in, my mother found a Ouija board on one of the empty bookshelves. Being an ex-missionary and an avid Christian, she was freaked out by these things and threw it away. I learned later that throwing away Ouija boards is one of the worst things you could do with them, and I still wonder if it's the ultimate cause of everything that I'm about to tell you. I was born shortly after the move-in. Some of my early memories are peculiar. The house had an upstairs bathroom and a downstairs bathroom. This is important, as most of the activity occurred in these 2 rooms, and they were directly above and below each other. I would often watch TV with my dad in the evening and run to the downstairs bathroom to use the restroom. At the ages of 4 and 6, I was terrified of being alone in the bathroom for some reason. To get to it, you had to shut the laundry room and shut the bathroom door. For some reason, when these doors closed, I felt very vulnerable and scared. I would beg my dad to stand outside the bathroom and wait for me to pee. He would always leave before I was done. He always thought it was funny. It drove me nuts. This early memory I've never been able to explain. I was in the upstairs bathroom when I was about 4 and standing by the towel rack. All I remember is feeling like I was paralyzed, sobbing horribly, and hearing weird and sinister voices rambling about something. What's weird is that this memory faded in and out as I got older. Over the next year or 2, I would try to suppress what happened, and then the memory would come creeping back, and eventually the creepy shit would happen again with the towel rack. This happened a few times. I blocked it out of my memory again, and then it came back years later. I'm willing to grant that these are false memories I somehow planted, because they are so weird and so fuzzy, but they fit so well with what happened years later. Growing up, my sister and I had many weird experiences. Most of them were minor. The house was strange. During the day, if you were home alone, the air was kind of funny. It just seemed thick and heavy in a way that other houses never were for me. The light from outside fluctuated oddly in the rooms when clouds went past. It didn't always feel bad, just dense. My sister and I always had issues sleeping in the house. When we were kids, we both had an incredibly hard time sleeping, despite having no family issues. We were afraid of things kids don't even think about. My sister had morbid fears that arms would be around from under each side of her bed, trying to rip her in half. There was a time when I felt something was laying in bed with me, and I was terrified and unable to sleep for an hour or more. Some days I would be sitting on my bed after school and have this weird feeling that something kept coming in and out of my door, even though it was closed. It would often happen over and over again. When I was 4, I had reoccurring nightmares that I was falling down into hell, which was this enormous open space with lava at the bottom and demons flying all about. Satan was enormous and played an organ the size of a building. My sister had dreams that she would be in our house and then discover an elevator that would go down into hell. She always woke up before seeing a certain point, though. I too had dreams where I would find extra parts of the house that felt incredibly foreboding and evil. I became an insomniac around the age of 13 or 14, partly because my mom's alcoholism started becoming a problem at this time, and I wanted to avoid her and have my own alone time. The price of this was staying up late in the creepy house, which only got creepier as the night went on, and seemingly tapered off around 4 a.m. My bedroom was on the second floor and I never kept the door open for any reason. The hallway was too creepy, even to look into. I would always walk swiftly down the stairs and into the kitchen, turning on every light on the way. In the kitchen I felt a bit better, but I always had that feeling that something was watching me. This kind of activity happened every single night of my life until I never saw the house again. My sister reports similar things. When my mom owned an Oldsmobile, she would look out the window at night and see the same ugly Satan face in the car every time, no matter how it was parked. Things often looked not quite right. Once I was looking at my reflection in the window, and my reflection looked much angrier than I should whenever I looked up. I had a horrific nightmare once that I was walking around the house and it was dark. I could see my parents crucified on the walls of my mom's bedroom. I couldn't see much detail, but it was bloody and gruesome. There was another dream where I came downstairs and an autopsy film was playing on the television. Many of my nightmares even today involve being in the house, and the house being dark, foreboding, and ugly. The scary moments are endless, but they were never real enough for me to think they were ghosts until I met my friend Kathy when I was 16. Before that, I was an atheist, logical, and stubborn about everything. Kathy was a Wiccan and had grown up in a much more obviously haunted house. She told me about spirits and I put 2 and 2 together and figured my house was probably haunted. I asked her to come to my house and see what she could feel. She was much better at this stuff. She went around the house doing some energy thing and thought she felt 2 things. A woman, who will come into play later, and a boy, something mischievous, but not evil. We later realized that she was very wrong about there being an innocent, mischievous boy. She felt this boy mainly in the upstairs bathroom, which was the room that I had the nastiest, ugliest, most foreboding feelings in. Something in that room seemed extremely menacing and hateful. What changed Kathy's mind about the boy? Well, one night she was over and decided to use the bathroom. She felt something menacing and irritated in that room and decided to meditate. When she did, she had the sensation that something had pricked her as if with a needle. Apparently, the night she went home, she had some kind of psychotic breakdown that her mom had to deal with. The upstairs bathroom only seemed to get worse as the years went on. I eventually stopped using it entirely to my mother's puzzlement, but a few things still happened. One night I was going down the stairs and looked across the hallway into the bathroom, and in the window I saw a flash of a figure. It was one of the ugliest things I'd ever seen. I could probably still draw it from memory. It was a melting face, Dolly style, with yellow orbs for eyes and blonde, disgustingly shoulder-length hair. I pretended nothing happened and went on downstairs. I always felt like if I showed visible fear, something awful would happen. One day I came home and my dad had a story for me. The strangest thing happened while everyone was gone, he said. The dog got into the bathroom and made a big mess. He somehow shut the door, opened the closet door, and in his fearful state threw things from the closet all over the bathroom. He was shaking when I got him out. Internally, I just said, Somehow the dog shut the door on himself and threw all this random crap from a high shelf all over the room. The strongly suggestive dark images that I would get continued. Whenever I tried to open the door to the laundry room, I would have a flash in my mind of this beast from an album cover that I really liked running down the laundry room at high speeds, shrieking. In my room, if my door was partially open, I felt as if the same face was peeking over the doorway, watching me. Another time, I observed my cat walking around my room in circles, as if she were terrified, looking behind her or jumping every few seconds, for about 20 minutes, as if something was following her. She was a wonderful cat and watched me sleep every night. I probably needed it. This kind of shit continued until I was 18, when something horrible happened. My dad planned a suicide that he fulfilled one morning that summer. I'm not going to go into the story because it's too much for now, but I'll just say that his bedroom was right next to the upstairs bathroom, and I often felt the same awful feelings in his room as I did in the upstairs bathroom, and they were strongest by the wall that connected the two rooms. I also slept with my dad until I was 12 because whenever I slept alone, I felt like something awful was going to get me. So, this is also the room I had the hell dreams in. The fucked up thing is that the activity died down after my father passed away. The house was unusually calm for a while, as if something was sated. The bad shit, unfortunately, was not over. My mother's alcoholism spiraled out of control at that point, and she never really got over the trauma of my dad's death. She eventually committed suicide too, in the same way and place my father did. This has been my cross to bear ever since, but that is a different story. There are a few ghostly things to mention in the meantime between my dad's death and her death. My mother had a long-lost cousin come over for New Year's Eve to meet her. While my mom was drunk and high and I was busy avoiding her, my cousin was alone with one of our dogs. She told us later that she turned around and looked into what used to be my dad's office, and she saw a black figure, and at that same moment the dog looked at it and ran away. This cousin claims that she could see spirits and that they are always white, but the things she kept seeing in our house were black. Now, remember when I said that Kathy thought there was a woman in the house as well? There was one night that I was away at college and my mom was doing her usual drinking by herself bullshit. Kathy got a funny feeling that something wasn't right at my house, and it was strong enough to make her drive there and check in. She found my mom, drunk as usual, being a sad, depressed mess. She talked to her for a bit, and in the middle of the conversation, my mom mentioned, "Sometimes I feel like there are spirits in this house." She joked that the woman who used to own the house was here while they were talking. Kathy had a strong feeling that there was some kind of female presence sitting on the stairs. It did not feel evil. For some reason, a name popped into Kathy's head. Does Mary Richardson ring any bells? My mom, who had done a ton of research on the house, said that was the name of one of the previous owners, probably from the 60s or 70s. Later, I had other people tell me they saw images of a hippie-ish woman in the house that fits Kathy's description of her. Same height, same hair, same demeanor. Around that same period, my sister started having nightmares where the roof would blow off of the house where my dad's bedroom and the upstairs bathroom were. For some reason, it was terrifying. I came back into town about 2 years after my mom passed and met up with one of my cousins. Not the cousin from before, We'll call this one Renee. We talked about a lot of things, and she eventually told me that she had had some spooky things happen to her before and can supposedly see ghosts. I asked her, of course, if anything ever happened in my house. She had some interesting things to say. For one, she said she never disliked the upstairs bathroom, but when she came over for holidays, she would often go upstairs to use the bathroom, then come back, and then go up again later when she knows no one else had been upstairs. She would find the previously immaculate upstairs bathroom a mess, with tissues everywhere, toilet paper everywhere, soap from the sink in the bathtub. She thought someone was playing tricks on her. She also hated the downstairs bathroom and said she wouldn't even go into the laundry room. She said it felt like something murderous was in there and she wouldn't even stand near it. I take her stories with more of a grain of salt than Kathy's, but Renee says she felt like she saw 5 separate spirits in the house. 3 of them are unimportant to the story, but the other 2 were a woman who sounds a lot like Kathy's Mary Richardson and the murderous nasty thing. Kathy and Renee and I always had the feeling that the murderous thing was a male, not sure why. Now for the final, most fucked up story. When my mom passed away, my sister and I were both in school in a different state and couldn't watch the house while we figured out what to do with it. Kathy, who became one of my best friends, decided to watch it for us, coming over once a week or so and staying the night. Among other things, she said sometimes she would try to go to sleep and would be unable to until it was sunrise because she felt some kind of inexplicable anxiety or terror. She was never able to sleep at all in my sister's bedroom, which was right next to the upstairs bathroom, and honestly always creeped me out a lot more than my bedroom did. The first night she stayed over, she dumped her clothes and books all over my sister's room's floor. She heard an exasperated voice from somewhere in the room. My God, what a mess! It sounded like a woman, my mother, perhaps, who was always a neat freak. Another night she was woken up out of sleep by a motherly voice calling her name, as if pestering her to fix something. Anyway, one evening Kathy came over and sat downstairs on one of the tables. The house felt especially ominous and dark that day, and she felt that she would lighten the mood. I think she did some pagan stuff and then decided to pray and say the Lord's Prayer. As she did so, a horrific fear came over her, and she looked behind her at the ceiling under where the upstairs bathroom should be. She said out loud, "Please leave me alone," but was so scared that it sounded like she was hearing her voice from outside of herself. Then, she heard an enormous thud from the upstairs bathroom, as if someone had dropped a suitcase from the ceiling to the floor, and then she heard huge, pounding footsteps. She ran out of the house and almost hit a tree pulling out of the driveway. Looking back down the road, something felt very wrong with the house and the entire property. She is the only one that has come close enough to seeing the thing materialize like that. Some days she said the house was so open and light and lovely. Other days it felt so awful, and some days it just felt very sad and mournful. Perhaps my mother's energy that she left. It is a house I will never forget, and that has stuck with me ever since. For many years I thought I was crazy, but after moving out I stopped having all these weird experiences. They never happened outside of the house. Hey guys, thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. So guys, I hope everybody has a really good weekend, and I hope everybody enjoyed the video as well. And I remember some of the comments in my last video about asking what are my favorite horror movies that I like to watch on Halloween. Well, the first one is obviously Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, by the way, not Rob Zombie's Halloween. I hate that movie. The other one is The Thing, The Conjuring, and for some reason I can't really come up with the other ones that are on the top of my head. Oh yeah, Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2, absolutely love those movies. Army of Darkness is a little to me. But yeah, those are some of my favorite horror movies to watch on Halloween. But anyways, guys, again, thank you all for watching, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.